I thought about talking with you folks. By the way, I have some notes, but I can't read them anyway, even though they're that big. So. But anyway, I was thinking that, I have a lot of information in my head and experience that this may be the last chance to pass it on. Who knows? And I think that it might be a good to start to tell you about the bee club itself. Me and Louis Smith, who was the district ranger at the Forest Service here, Barry Wright, and probably Lloyd Allison, I don't know who else, were having coffee at the house one evening and talking. And Louis proposed that we set up that we organize a bee school. And he said, I think a bee school, a bee club for the area. And so we sat down, and within the next couple of days we had the bylaws all drafted up, and we had organized the bee club. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was beekeeping, particularly in North Georgia. First, I'll say the first time that I ever saw a hive of bees, I must have been about 6 years old, and it was in my grandfather's apple orchard. And all I remember about those bees is I distinctly remember that they were the type of hive we have now, Langstroth, and that was pretty early. See, that was a long time ago because I'm pretty old. So it's in the early 30s anyway, 1930s. All I remember about those, and I do remember them distinctly because I knew they could sting, and I was wary of them. So it's something sort of dramatic and impressive, so you remember it even though you're very young. So I did remember those. Then, as I got older, I got my first beehive in 1962, I believe it was. And so, but that was just a hobby of just a beehive out of curiosity to see how it worked. And so the hives that my grandfather had were what we call patent hives. So evidently the Langstroth hive, or the Dedant hive as they were referred to, were patent at one time, and I guess it was by Dedant. And we talk about the Langstroth hive in France particularly, they call them Dedant hives today. So the typical beehive in the mountains at that time was a hollow log. They would take, and they referred to them as bee gums, and they were kept very much like the European scalp. I think they called them gums because the old black gum trees were typically hollow, and they could get black gum and cut it up in sections. When I was over in France, I saw they were doing that, or had done that, and I saw an ancient place where they had them, and they used hollow chestnuts. But in the mountains here, it was the bee gum that most people used, and they used what they would do. They'd cut in sections about 3 feet high or so, and they'd sit on a block, and they put cross sections in there, cross sticks, I guess is a better word for it, and those cross sticks were for the bees to attach the comb to. Then when it came harvest time, and they would swarm like the mischief, and everybody thought it was the bees that were bad and they would swarm, but the bees swarm like they do out of trees, out of hollows in trees. It's because they're confined. There's not much space. So they'll swarm as soon as they get crowded in there. The bees in those scalps, or in the hives, if you will, the bee gum, if you will, when the bees went in, and they usually put swarms in them. That was about the only way they could do it really back then. And since it swarmed a lot, they called it swarms. And they put a swarm in there. They'd attach to those sticks that they had at the top. And then the brood would be at the top, and the honey production would be hanging below the brood. And I guess that's sort of typical in nature that it's that way, although the professors, when they talk, they say it's always above, but it was below, and I've seen that same thing in bee trees also. A lot of people had these bee gums, if you will, in the mountains. They were just behind the house, were virtually disease-free, really. There was foulbrood, but it wasn't a real problem up there. To harvest it, they could take and cut the honey off from the bottom, just turn it over, take the honey comb off the bottom. That's one way to harvest it. The other way is to reestablish your hives from the swarms for the next year and just break up completely the old hive and take their honey. And of course, that would be the end of that hive. But then they would have enough swarms. There was a lot of those in the mountains, and when I was in school, the kids would talk about it, and so my dad didn't have one of those, but in fact, he didn't keep bees until I think the 60s or so, 1960s. But let's go forward to, say, before the mites came, okay? Now, before the mites came, something was happening up here with the bees. It was still hard to keep bees up here. They still would winter with small clusters. They did. They had this one disease, was American foulbrood. It would take out some, but a lot of times it was, they would just winter with small clusters, and we don't know why, but they would. So, but it's hard. This is a hard place in the mountains to raise bees anyway, because where you don't have a lot of snow or anything like that, you still have a long winter when there's nothing blooming. And so the bees have to make out with what they get in the fall to make it through the winter. Well, then the mites came. My first experience with mites was in the year 1990. And that was the winter that, or the year, they must have arrived in '89, because in 1990 we lost a lot of hives from the tracheomite, not varroa. They weren't here yet, but they were coming fast. So the varroa was later, but the tracheomite that winter knocked out most of everybody's hives up here and throughout the country, I guess, when they did arrive here. It's interesting, you don't hear much about them now, I don't guess, the tracheomites. Well, what happened was a guy named Steve Tabor was working with, I'm not sure what year it was, but it was certainly before those mites arrived. And he was working on a way to prevent American foulbrood. He found out that he could develop a bee that didn't get American foulbrood. And the way that it did it was that it cleaned out everything that was in any diseased hive to the extent that the American foulbrood couldn't reproduce in the hive. So he had really something great, and he called it a hygienic bee. That was the first time, I think, that anyone talked about hygienic bees. He was at the experiment station up in Wisconsin at Madison. He gave it to the industry, in effect, and the industry was used to using something else. Terramycin, an antibiotic. So they really weren't very interested in it. It's amazing, but they weren't. So he had trouble selling the beekeepers on using this bee that was actually a perfect bee otherwise, except that it was, it was hygienic, it was resistant to the American foulbrood. Beekeepers have their routines, and they're not eager to change like most people, so they stuck with American with the terramycin to control it. Well, things rocked on, okay? And then when I was talking about the tracheomite arrival, of course, we started treating. The first worry was, how do we get rid of them? Dr. Delaplane, I think, was one of the advocates of using grease patties in the hive. Make a patty out of Crisco and sugar, and put it in the hive, and then there's enough oil gets on the bees that the tracheomite are having trouble getting in the trachea of the bee, and that was the way of controlling it. Well, in the meantime, somebody woke up to this idea of the hygienic bee again. And I think that most of the bees probably that are around now are basically hygienic, because you don't hear much about tracheomites. They're hygienic in that sense, okay? That was then the varroa arrived. Let's go with that, okay? The varroa arrived, and when I first saw it on bees, I think it must have been about 1993 or something like that. Well, you know, here come the chemicals. We had a pretty good chemical for a while to control them, and it did work. And it basically was the amatraz that we're now using again, but we used it for a little while then, and then various other chemicals. Then, since then, people have been working on mite-resistant bees, the bees that are varroa sensitive, hygienic, and control the mites naturally, but they're having, you know, the beekeepers are doing the same thing, you know. The chemicals work, so they keep going with that. It's a shame we can't go the natural way. And there's been a lot of research, and there's been a lot of proof that doing this and that will make a difference. Back in those days, the Extension Service was sort of in a different phase of their operation, especially in the state of Georgia. They used other beekeepers' bees. We were working on varroa part of the time. We bought a bunch of bees from that were hygienic and sold as hygienic, and we set up an experiment to compare them with bees from South Georgia and to see if they had more mites, fewer mites, or whatever. And what we found out, the South Georgia bees were a little bit better than the ones who we bought for hygienic bees. And then we got the idea, if actually I insisted on it, that we go out and test the hives to see if they're really hygienic. And the way you test them is you freeze the brood and see how soon how long it takes them to clean it out, do it with liquid nitrogen. So we did that, and we found out that lo and behold, the South Georgia bees were getting hygienic. And I guess that came about because of the tracheomite. It's the only thing I can think of, that they were getting hygienic, and they probably are now as far as the tracheomite is concerned. There was a number of other ones that we did an experiment at that. And Bob Benny was involved in one of them where we compared Russians with some South Georgia bees, and they didn't like the results of that because the Russians outperformed them, so they never published that data.
When did you start keeping Russians in that whole time?
I got my first Russian breeder queen in the year 2000. And I'm not here to talk about Russians. In fact, the big problem with Russians is, I will say this, is the fact that there are too many others that are around us that are not Russian. And it's hard to keep them pure, and they don't mix well with the other bees. They just don't. You get a bee that's more aggressive, you get one that loses its resistance to mites very quickly. So it doesn't mix with other bees very well. Well, I'm doing pretty good. I about got through with it.
You gotta turn the paper over.
Big paper, big writing, I can almost read it. I guess that with that, I'm probably pretty open to questions. We've come a long way since then. I don't know where we're going now. Eventually, I guess that we do have to get away from chemicals. Some beekeepers say that this is just an interim period and we will get rid of chemicals in the hives. Others are very skeptical of it, and it'll ever happen. So,
I remember some guys saying when you split a hive, you split the mites and you reduce the number.
yeah, and that's interesting. There was one experiment, you know, they found that bees in bee trees tend to have less mites. That was an experiment up north. Here I'm not sure because you get so many beetles. There was an experiment where they set up, and I don't know who did it right offhand, an experiment with keeping bees in single boxes all year, and then others in double boxes. I don't know whether they took honey off of them or not, but they found out that those in the single boxes survived much better, and it was simply because they swarmed. Swarmed more. When you break the brood nest up and they start all over again, you have a new queen, there's a period that there's no brood being raised, then the mite count goes down. So it didn't, in that experiment, the singles died also, but not nearly to the extent that the doubles did. You can get a little bit of a lesson from that, I guess, and that is that making splits, and you can certainly reduce your mite load, but that's not enough. You got to get a good queen in there. The good queen is very important, and you want her at least to be hygienic. If not, I don't know of any real resistance to mites, varroa that's tough, but except for the Russians.
So that first hygienic bee for the tracheal mites, that all just went away? Does it exist anymore, or it's
I think
interbred?
most of the bees are hygienic
Okay.
for that sense. What do you think, Bob?
Yeah.
He agrees back there, so, you know, and it's just a matter of if they weren't hygienic, they died, I guess. You know, and of course the beekeepers were selecting those that didn't have the mites. I give them credit for that too. So they in effect started what Steve Tabor was advocating, but they still have problems with the American foulbrood. They're putting the bees under such stress that they do have some problem with the American foulbrood yet, and they do treat with terramycin and tylosin antibiotics in the hive to control anything that gets in there. The main thing is still the American foulbrood.
A gentleman developed a bee that would take care of the foulbrood, so that bee went away?
That particular bee did, I guess.
Wow.
Yeah. But that particular strain, but it sort of came in again, and there was a big thing about a Minnesota hygienic bee, and it still is. I guess still marketed.
Huh.
It's an Italian bee that is very hygienic to control tracheal mites, and they claim a little bit of control over varroa, but it's not very much.
I got a question for you, Carl.
Sure.
What would you do differently if you were just starting out in beekeeping now? Knowing what you know now.
I don't
What would
like
you do
those
then?
intelligent questions.
Oh, that's a good question, I think. I know one, but I don't know.
No, I think I did what I wanted to do. I never wanted to be a big beekeeper. And no, I don't have any regrets about what I did. So I wouldn't have done it differently.
Good.
Yeah, I wouldn't have done it differently. I never had the ambition to, I didn't have the need, I guess, financially, and I didn't have the big ambition to become a big beekeeper. However, I think as a young man, if I had started out as a young man, I could think it would be a very interesting occupation. I was a bureaucrat anyway before I retired and started keeping bees, so, in earnest, I guess. And I did it only because I wanted something to do. And now I've got some health problems, but I can't wait to get started anyway, because the winters, when I don't have something to do, they're miserable. You know, you can take entertainment so far. You can take a cruise and it's nice, but after the cruise or whatever you're doing, it's still not being active keeping bees. So.
When did you go from 2 hives to 200 hives, Carl?
Oh, okay. That was probably in around the year 2000, something like that. Yeah, and I had one time about 500, and I've only got about 250 now. So it's enough to keep me busy, and it gives some. And I need some help.
I know your wife is a master beekeeper. I guess
Yes.
she's been around bees all her life. What impact did she play in your business?
She sells honey.
Yeah.
She helps me when I need her. She's the best person I know of to raise queens with. We work together as a team. So without her, it wouldn't be any fun at all. Let's put it that way. It wouldn't be any fun at all right now. Of course, it was fun before, but it was a different world before her. But no, I don't want anything without Virginia being involved.
Do you see a problem with the neonicotinoids?
Neonicotinoids.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I don't know. I have a friend up in Iowa that is he's a beekeeper and a corn grower, has a big farm. And he for a long time was saying, it ain't no problem, my bees are okay. And then pretty soon he changed his tune and started saying, it is a problem. So, but up here, I don't know enough about it to really say. I know that I have problems sometimes when around commercial areas where they're soybeans and corn with all the stuff they spray on them and what have you. That's the neonicotinoid or the glyphosate or the whatever, the insecticides. I don't know which one's killing my bees, but I know that they are. And my best wintering this year happened in a remote area on the National Forest. And that's touchy too, because you got to have pollen. And I guess they were close enough to get pollen in the fall, and as well as in the spring. So,
Not wanting to use chemicals, what would you use if I have 2 or 3 hives and I'm interested in trying to keep them healthy?
I would say that if you don't want to use chemicals in your hive, that you buy a new queen, a Russian queen every year and put them in it, because what will happen during the year, you'll have a swarm or the queen will be superseded, they'll raise a new queen, and you'll no longer have a Russian, you'll have something that's mated with something else. So that's what people tend to be reluctant to do with the Russian bees. And I had a location this year where all the bees died. I'm sure of the farm chemicals now, thinking about it. But then the guy that I had him on his property was grieving over it. He likes the honey, I pay him in honey, and he was really upset when I took the bees away. The equipment that the bees had been in, I took it away. And he said, well, can't you just help me set up a beehive in the back so I can make my own honey? I haven't talked to him yet. I did say, yeah, I guess so. And then we were going to see him later, but I think I wouldn't do it because he can buy honey from me much cheaper than he can try to keep a beehive alive in his backyard. And really, beekeeping is an art, and it's an extreme art in the sense that it takes a lot of experience to know what to do. And I've worked with some other beekeepers, and those that are successful do it right. I think Ben is a good example of that, because when he does it like it should be done. He's a professional, and it takes years and years of experience to do that. A lot of times the person that wants to talk most about their beekeeping and how all their successes and so has been keeping bees for 2 years. But it takes a lot of experience. It takes a long time.
Advice for new beekeepers, what should they do?
I think they should attend your club, and they should be very interested in how to keep their bees alive, and they should not try to keep them naturally if the bees are not able to survive without chemicals. And there are beekeepers that say, in the fall you'll see all these bees and you'll say they're going to survive because look at all these bees, nothing can happen to them. And then they're dead very shortly, see. So the best you could do is take advice of experienced beekeepers, take advice you might get here at the club, and treat your bees in the early fall. August is best to try to control the mites, because the mites are critical. If you can't, they carry all these other diseases, the viruses, and so other than that, keep a good queen in there. Yeah.
I think that if you look at mites on bees, like you look at bed bugs on humans, you're not going to treat bed bugs naturally. And you're not gonna treat lice naturally. You either kill it off or they're gonna kill your bees. I mean, that's just.
Let's
the way
hope
I
it
look
won't
at it.
always be that way, but it is right now, yeah.
Yeah.
And if I wanted to, I couldn't produce Russian bees for you, so. But it's been fun. I really enjoyed beekeeping. I was fascinated with them. I kept them in various places in my career, and while I was working for the U.S. Forest Service, I'd have a hive or two in the backyard. Oh, I'll tell you an interesting thing happened. I was in Milwaukee, and I had a hive in the backyard, okay, in the city, actually Brookfield, just outskirts of Milwaukee, a real nice area. And lo and behold, one day I got a notice in the mail. And evidently one of the neighbors had complained about me having bees there. Not that the bees had ever bothered anybody, but just they just saw me. Some people panic when they see a hive of bees. And the notice said that if you don't move your hive of bees in, I don't remember the exact time, it was 3 months or something like that, you will be fined $5 according to. I moved them anyway, although I could have paid the $5. I don't know how often it would happen again, but I had them under some beautiful lilac bushes, and they did okay up there. That was before the varroa mites came. But it's always been hard keeping bees here in the mountains because of the short period that you have a floor indoors, and the fact that you only have one or maybe two honey flows. If you're in an area where you don't get sourwood, it's doubly hard, because even though we take sourwood off, the bees will maintain their numbers during that period in July, and they will also store some of that down in the hive. They take care of themselves, at least mine do, so that's what you want them to do. And if you got any doubt, the time to feed is in the fall. Get them heavy enough that you know that they'll have enough to go through the winter. And how much that is, I've heard a lot of different numbers, but you need 2 or 3 good frames of honey in there. I manage them with a feed super. Some people manage doubles. It's not convenient for me to manage doubles, but it depends on the kind of beekeeping you're doing, what you're doing. But the average backyard beekeeper, it's up to you. Either manage them with doubles or manage them with a single with a super on top of them. You do have a little trouble with getting them to go up. Actually, the queen wants to go up. The queen wants to go because that's what they do in a bee tree. And they want to store the honey below, and we reverse that. We put the honey above them. Well, not that they don't want honey above them, they do want honey above them, but just the queen wants to be up there with it.
I pull a frame now, and it happened last year too. And it's like she makes it upside down. I have my honey under here, and then my pollen and brood up here. That's with the brand new queen again this year. The frames are upside, I pull it out thinking I'm crazy, and they're upside down. Is that possible?
You put the honey below the bee?
No, I don't, no, on the frame, as they bring them in now. Now they're just in, and I pull a frame to look at it, like the upside down rainbow, I guess you'd call it.
Well, there are a lot of ways to manage them, and the idea really is to keep the queen challenged and have enough room for her to lay. When there was someone here at the club, Steve, the pilot anyway, was talking about checkerboarding, and so that's just very intensive management of a few hives. But you can do the same idea by giving them plenty of room above to put the honey and having drawn comb rather than keeping your drawn comb for the next year. And drawn comb that does not have brood raised in it, wax moths won't bother. So I guess I've talked enough. Want me to shut up? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.